I derailed it.
Welcome to the One Accord podcast. We are in the middle of our biblical theology project, and we are finishing up the book of Genesis. Chapters 48, 49, and 50 are on the agenda for today. We might still have one more conversation just about the entire book, but this will conclude at least looking at every individual chapter. And as always, here to talk about this important book with me are my good friends Eric and Greg. I guess maybe I can probably say we're still good friends at this point, right? Anyway, Eric, how you doing today? Yeah, so.
We are friends. I mean, that's a fact.
We're still talking.
Yes, we are still talking after all this time. But Eric, how you doing today? Anything new or exciting in your world?
A lot of new things, a lot of exciting things going on in the world, and we're blessed enough to be caught up in the middle of some of those things. I'm looking forward to this podcast. We're wrapping up the last few chapters of Genesis. Genesis is like one of my favorite books in the Bible. I like origins, and Genesis gives us so much, so many details about the origin of everything. So I'm excited to bring this book to a close and to prepare for future conversations.
Greg, how about you? Blessedly boring, or anything new and exciting you want to chat about before we dive into the material for today?
Blessedly boring, just trucking along. So I'm doing well, though.
Just trucking along. Do you also love origin stories? Are you a Genesis?
Chronicles. I'm a Chronicles guy. The book
you like First and Second Chronicles.
Yeah. That's where I'm at in my my morning reading right now, and that's actually kind of a slog at times. And so I appreciate and enjoy Genesis. I don't think I would say that this is my favorite book of the Bible, but I enjoy it, appreciate it.
All right. Well, I can't wait till we get to First and Second Chronicles now, and we're going to really bring it to life, especially those things that you think are a slog. We'll show you why they're not boring.
Okay, show me why I'm wrong. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, if you guys got nothing else, I got nothing else really that's exciting going on with me. So why don't we go ahead and dive into Genesis chapter 48.
Now it came about after these things that Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is sick." So he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. When it was told to Jacob, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel collected his strength and sat up in the bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. But your offspring that have been born after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. Now as for me, when I came from Paddan, Rachel died, to my sorrow, in the land of Canaan on the journey, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, Who are these? Joseph said to his father, These are my sons, whom God has given me here. So he said, Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well. Then Joseph took them from his knees, and bowed with his face to the ground. Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his hand, and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. He blessed Joseph and said, The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and may my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to his father, Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he also will be great. However, his younger brothers shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. He blessed them that day, saying, By you Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you, and bring you back to the land of your fathers. I give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow.
As we see Jacob/Israel's life coming to an end, he's beginning to bless his family members. Here at the beginning of this chapter, he takes Joseph's sons as his own. What do you guys make of that?
Because of Reuben's sin, which is mentioned earlier in Genesis, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph. We see that actually later, just one chapter later. We read about some of the details of that. Genesis 49, 3 and 4. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might in the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent power. Uncontrolled as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. That's just a way of saying that Reuben slept with one of his father's concubines. Again, that's not new information. We read about that earlier in Genesis. And there was some pretty catastrophic consequences as a result of that. So Reuben, as the firstborn, he lost his birthright, and the birthright was given to Joseph instead. And Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they received Reuben's double portion. What this means is that his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, would become two separate tribes in Israel. But it does say here that the younger would be greater than the older, which sounds very familiar. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later on, but that's what I gathered from all this.
Greg, your brow is furrowed.
Yeah, my brow is a bit furrowed. I don't know that I've ever considered this, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I've never thought about this as taking away Reuben's birthright. I guess in my mind that was always kind of the preeminence was always transferred from Reuben to Judah. Has always been my understanding. Giving the double portion to Joseph, I see your argument there. Though these aren't, as time goes on, these aren't treated as one tribe but two tribes, and so again, I'm not trying to argue you're wrong. I've just never seen it that way before.
So how have you seen it? I guess what would be your thoughts?
I see this as Israel saying these kind of I just read it more on its surface, right? Where he says they will be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Basically raising up his two grandsons to the status of sons, so that they are considered tribes of Israel rather than Joseph being a tribe of Israel. Adoption, if you want to call it. It's not really adoption, but I am just raising them up to the status of sons, so that they are counted as sons rather than as grandsons. And so when we get to verse 40 or chapter 49, I see it clearly. You're first in preeminent in dignity, preeminent in power, uncontrolled as water. You shall not have preeminence. I don't see that preeminence going to the sons of Joseph. I think I see it going to Judah. So
it is interesting, and this is kind of a follow-up question. I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this. The term patriarchy is thrown around a lot. Some people hate it, some people like it, but whatever. The fact of the fathers matters a lot, and so Joseph doesn't object, but it is interesting to think, okay, if Jacob is elevating his grandsons to be like children, and now we're going to talk about the house of Joseph as the houses of Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's name gets dropped out, and that could be a slight to Joseph. At least it could be taken that way. I don't know that many people, wanted to be known by their sons. I think many many people wanted their sons to be known by their fathers. And so, do you guys have any thoughts about that? I mean, it seems like Joseph maybe could have objected to this or said, "Dad, what are you talking about? These are my kids. I'm your son." But that doesn't happen. He does object a little bit later. He objects to the blessing, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you guys have any thoughts about that, about how this possibly could have been a slight to Joseph? And I mean, he certainly doesn't seem to take it that way, or at least it's not recorded that he took it that way.
Yeah, I guess I don't. I've never, again, another thing I've never considered, right? We're racking them up. I've never considered that this would be a slight to Joseph. This seems eminently gracious to me. Your sons are, any sons beyond this will be counted amongst their brothers. You're not getting any less. But here, I think what I see is out of an intense love for Joseph, I'm going to take your two sons, and they're going to get, in effect, that double portion, which otherwise wouldn't have happened, right? Like they would have only gotten one portion, whatever that portion is. They would have had to split that one, but now they're equal with their uncles, and so I don't see it as a slight at all.
I never really thought about it that way. Joseph doesn't seem to mind at all. He doesn't object to that, and the fact that it's interesting the way that the text words it, because actually it says, I believe, in 48:15, as Jacob is blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, it says in verse 15, he blessed Joseph. So Joseph it's almost like Ephraim and Manasseh is used interchangeably with Joseph in this context. Joseph received the blessing in the sense that his sons received it. And so it was not simply a blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh, but a blessing to Joseph himself. So I think Joseph looked at it, seems like he probably looked at it as an honor that his sons would be counted, among Jacob's sons. So I guess I don't really know, any other way to look at it beyond that.
I like I said, I'm not suggesting that he should have taken it as a slight. It would be interesting, if my dad looked at me at the end of his life and blessed my children, which is an impossibility. My dad never met his grandkids, but if he had done that and just said, "I'm going to kind of skip over you, and these kids are going to be like they're my kids," you could be like, "Well, thanks, Dad." I guess I don't know. So there is a way of reading it that way, but you're right. I think Joseph doesn't seem to take it as a slight, and it does say that he was blessing Joseph in doing this. So. That seems right. Joseph doesn't object to this, but then he does object to the actual blessing itself. He wanted his older to be blessed with the right hand and the younger to be blessed with the left hand. And Israel, with some of these details, his eyes were dim. It's almost making it like, oh, it could have been a mistake. Joseph tries to object to this, but then Israel says, well, what I did, I did. So what do you think about this, and why was Joseph upset about this part?
Well, the first thing I want to note is that this transfer of greater blessing from the older to the younger seems to be intentional. So this isn't the result of an old man not seeing very well and not thinking very well, because Jacob actually says, I know that this is what I've done. I know I gave the greater blessing to the younger rather than the older. So this was intentional, not accidental. And it seems like it's possible that God ordained it this way. If Jacob did this with confidence, which Jacob seems to have done this with confidence that this was the right thing to do, and that tells me that God probably somehow told Jacob that that's what he needed to do. Now, the text doesn't say that, but that's the impression I get as I read it. So this is actually not inconsistent with God's character either, because remember in Genesis 25:23, when he was speaking of Rebekah, he said, there are two nations in your womb. The older will serve the younger. In other words, the younger will be greater. So this is not something that seems surprising to me, and this is something that God did in the past. At least he did something similar in the past.
Yeah, it's funny, as I read this, I go, you ask that question, like how much was this steered by God? And that's going to be my default position. But I also go, I wonder how much of this was Jacob kind of predisposed to blessing the younger over the older based upon his personal history. I don't know that that's the case, but I have, I don't know. I have to wonder, like, oh, was he going? Yeah, I'm gonna do this thing again. I don't know that that's why, but I wonder.
Seemed to like it worked out okay for him, so
Yeah.
maybe easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
he likes an underdog, maybe, you know.
Yeah,
so.
fair enough. I mean, and again, Joseph was upset, but he didn't listen to the protestations of Joseph. What do you make about the actual content of the blessing? I mean, the things that he said. Do you have any insight into the meaning of this?
So I think it's interesting that Jacob begins by worshiping God and praising God for his faithfulness. That's other prayers in Scripture begin that way, with worship and praise. The rest of the blessing is consistent with promises God made earlier. Jacob says, "May my name live on in them," that is in Ephraim and Manasseh, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. And in Genesis 12:2, speaking to Abraham, God said, "I will bless you and make your name great." We see that in different blessings, some of the ones we've already read, the person that's doing the blessing will repeat some of the promises that God already made earlier. So it's not like in some cases it's not brand new information. It's more like, repeating what God said. Other times it's different information. But Jacob also said, "May they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." And many years earlier, God promised Abraham that he'd be the father of a multitude. So the contents of Jacob's blessing seem to be, in some ways, a repetition of promises that God made earlier. So that's what I observed.
Yeah, I'm going to make two observations. First is that this blessing appears very general to me as compared to other things that we've seen. Really, the blessing starts in verse 16, right? "Bless the lads, and may my name live on in them. May the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." And then down in verse 20, he blessed them, saying, by you, Israel, pronounce blessing, saying, "May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." A very general blessing. Now, we tend to read into it, I think, a little bit, and we go outside of the actual blessing. We see some from verse 19 and making a multitude of nations. So first, it's very general in my eyes. And second, something that we tend to rebel against today. The blessing is fruitfulness. The blessing is children. The blessing is a legacy of abundant children who walk in the way. And that if somebody were to bless pull the random Christian today and give them this blessing, may you have a whole household of children.
Nope. No more blessing.
I'm out.
No more.
No more. Keep your blessing to yourself.
I'm too blessed already.
I'm way too blessed. And so, again, do we see this out of verse 19? He will also be great. And so, now, is that great? He is a great man, or is he great in number? We could argue over that. But the blessing here is fruitfulness insofar as it comes to having a legacy of a multitude of people coming from you. And so I find that interesting.
Yep. I mean, if we were just reading about Genesis, leaving everything else out of it, which is what we have done so far, it would be really, really hard to say that the promise of more and more and more children and more grandchildren and great-grandchildren is anything other than a tremendous blessing. And that was part of the mandate from the very beginning when God made human beings on the earth, was to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth. And so something shifted along the way, and whether it's because of lack of resources or because of other pursuits, but eventually people started to think that having more than 2.6 kids was just too much. And so anyway, people can wrestle with those things on their own, but I'm with you, Greg. It does certainly seem that that is at least tied to part of this. Eric, you said something very interesting that I also wanted just to follow up on, and Greg, what you were saying was also related. But getting back to some of the promises that God had made earlier, moving beyond the content of the blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh, at the very end of this chapter, he turns his attention back to Joseph, and he reminds him, he says, God is going to be with you, and he'll also bring you back to the land of your fathers. And so we talked about, especially in our last episode, that there was this pending prophecy that the people were going to go and be in a foreign land. They'd be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But getting back to the promises that God made, he is saying there will be a return. Do you guys have any other thoughts or comments about that before we dig into chapter 49?
Well, I think it seems like they had the promises that God made in the past in their minds. They were anticipating these things. They knew God was faithful. God had been faithful all the way up until this point. They had no reason to expect otherwise, and so they were longing for and looking forward to God fulfilling all of His promises to them, not just a few.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. By the blessing of God, Israel at least had a long-term faithfulness of God in view here. God had a plan, and that plan was going to be carried out regardless of whatever circumstances came. And so this is something to be modeled in our life. If I was to pull an application from this, it would be, have faith like Israel. Now, is God promising to pull you out of your bad job? That's not what I'm saying. But the things He has promised, it might take 400 years, but His promises will be fulfilled. And so,
I like that you swing towards the application. And if you hadn't gone there, I was going to ask another follow-up. So thanks for getting there before I had to ask it. And I agree with you that this is something that should still be modeled. I do think that there are many Christians who, for whatever reason, maybe they've taken the word of men, or they've just really wanted something in their own mind or heart, and they've maybe thought that was a promise of God, and maybe they've been disappointed or something if it doesn't happen the way that they expected. But I do believe that just like Jacob, just like Joseph, we can, as Christians, put our faith in what God has actually promised. He will do what He has said. And He might not do it today or tomorrow, but He will accomplish the things that He has promised. And we should live and stand upon the actual promises of God and live our life in light of those things. And so I'm not going to ask us to run ahead and get beyond this to the promises that are there. None of us sitting here were promised that our descendants would be enslaved and oppressed in a foreign land for 400 years and that we would go back to the land of our fathers. So this particular promise isn't for us, but the general idea that what God has promised to us, He will fulfill in the timeline that He has declared. I think that is a good application. And so if you want to know what those promises are, read your Bible and don't just read Genesis. You got to read the whole thing. You guys got anything else? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. Not only that, but don't forget that the God that we've been talking about is sovereign in Egypt, and just like He's sovereign here, He's still sovereign today. So even if He hasn't promised it, if He wants it, it's going to happen. If He wants you to have that better job, if you want whatever it is, nothing's going to stand in the way of what He has decided is best and that He's going to bring about, even if it isn't written, on the 28th day of January, Joe Kohler is going to receive a new job. Hope that's not prophetic, brother.
Is it? Is that?
It's no, definitely. I'm not a prophet or a son of a prophet, but
I guess we'll see if it comes to pass.
See if it comes to pass. But yeah, so God is still sovereign here in America, just like He was in Egypt all those years ago.
Amen. Eric, you got any final thoughts on this?
I think we're good.
He thinks we're good, folks. So Genesis 49.
Then Jacob summoned his sons and said, "Assemble yourselves, that I may tell you what will befall you in the days to come. Gather together and hear, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might in the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Uncontrolled as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. He ties his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are dull from wine, and his teeth white from milk. Zebulun will dwell at the seashore, and he shall be a haven for ships, and his flank shall be towards Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between the sheepfolds. When he saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant, he bowed his shoulder to bear burdens, and became a slave at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider falls backward. For your salvation I wait, O Lord. As for Gad, raiders shall raid him, and he will raid at their heels. As for Asher, his food shall be rich, and he will yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a doe let loose, he gives beautiful words. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring, its branches run over a wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, and shot at him and harassed him. But his bow remained firm, and his arms were agile, from the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. From the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast of the womb. The blessings of your father have surpassed the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of the one distinguished among his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them. He blessed them, every one, with a blessing appropriate to him. Then he charged them and said to them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephraim the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought, along with the field from Ephraim the Hittite for a burial site. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it, purchased from the sons of Heth. When Jacob finished charging his sons, he drew his feet into the bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people.
A very interesting chapter here as Joseph goes. Much of it is made of the content of, not Joseph, but Jacob blessing his sons. Some of it seems really positive. Others of it seems negative. Do we have to reconcile the fact that this is called, him blessing his sons with the fact that some of it is maybe less than positive or certainly getting into the realm of the negative?
Yeah, it's interesting because, in verse, 28, I believe, it says that he blessed them. He blessed them, every one. And so everything he says here in this chapter is called, a blessing. So I was thinking a lot about this earlier last week, and Jacob did bless most of his sons. The vast majority of the chapter does contain blessings. Now, there are some sons that were kind of like rebuked, I guess maybe is one way to say it. Reuben and Simeon and Levi. And it just in case anyone forgot, Simeon and Levi were the ones who slaughtered the whole city. We read about that earlier when their sister was raped, and they basically slaughtered the people of Shechem, I think it was, to take revenge. And so, and Reuben, of course, as we just read, slept with one of his father's concubines. So even, the negative things that Jacob says about his sons here, they were negative things because their sons did these evil things. So it wasn't like he was blessing them. It wasn't like he was cursing them or rebuking them arbitrarily. They did evil, and they were asking for these kinds of rebukes. But even the sons he rebuked, I guess you could say, were blessed in that they were told what they needed to hear, because he says, with the blessing appropriate to him. And so from that, I get that every son received what he needed to hear. It was not always pleasant, but they needed to hear it, whatever it was. And if rebuke helps someone or helps future generations repent and return to the right path, then the rebuke is kind of like a blessing in disguise. And I think as we read the rest of Scripture, we'll find that rebuke actually serves to be a blessing in many cases.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'm not an expert in ancient blessings, but I'm not exactly certain that it means what. Like, if I was to bless Joe right now, he would expect a good thing. He would expect. I mean, I would
considering the source, I wouldn't be uber confident.
But I mean, like, I read this and I go, we don't know basically anything about Issachar, but like, hey, you're going to be a slave. There's your blessing.
Appropriate to you.
Appropriate to you. And so, yeah, I guess I don't know what to think about these as blessings, the way I think about blessings, so much as maybe prophetic words, more than what we would call a blessing.
If you don't think about blessing this way, do you think you should change the way you think about it to fit more with this? And should we think of blessing as simply positive things? Or, I mean, what Eric was saying is an interesting point. If you're rebuking someone for things that they did, that might not feel as good as someone saying nice things, but it might be better. It might be a more important thing. It might actually be a greater blessing if you'll hear that, and if your descendants would hear that, to not repeat the same sins of the fathers or the mistakes of the fathers. But, I mean, we've all been on the record. None of us think about blessing the same. Like, the import that this generation was putting on blessings clearly has not passed on to the common day. If there are fathers who take the time to individually bless all their children with verbal blessings, laying hands on them, especially as they're nearing the end of their death, it's a great minority. It's not like I mean, maybe more people do it than I realize, but it doesn't seem like something that's practiced widely.
Especially when you consider that these are like adults, right?
Right.
I mean, these are men probably closer to their death. Some of them, yeah. Reuben, closer to their death than they would be to being
Agreed.
Called young men.
So I tend to think about blessing more like you, just naturally. And so this question isn't just for you. It's when I think of blessing, I don't typically think of saying some of these strong words, I guess, to some of his descendants. So should we be changing our mind as what we think about blessing is, or are we right, or just cultures are different, so it's just chalked up to that? I mean, you have any thoughts on that?
I guess more questions than thoughts, right? Like, what I get a chuckle as I read the end of Reuben's blessing. He says, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Like, in my mind, Jacob, he's saying this, and then he looks around and he goes, the dude went up to my couch. Can you believe this? Like, I get no respect, So it's probably not what he did, but it's what I see in my mind. So what is the purpose of this? And again, it's a question, not a. I don't have an answer. Again, Simeon and Levi, like, this cursed be their anger. Is he not cursing them in this blessing? So what? I don't know that I have a good answer for what is the purpose of this blessing.
Let me just say, just to add one point to this that maybe shed some light on it. Remember that when he's speaking of these men, his sons, he's obviously speaking really of the tribes that would come from them.
Why?
Because, well, for example, when he says to Simeon and Levi, he says in verse 7, I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. This is not something that happened to the men.
So this is, hold on, I'm going to counterpoint or question to clarify. Verse 7, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce. Is he talking about the anger of the future children of Simeon and Levi, or is he talking about the anger of Simeon and Levi?
Well, he's talking about the anger of Simeon and Levi, but the effects of their anger would impact their descendants.
Yeah,
Now,
I'm not saying it doesn't
impacted
impact. I'm not saying it doesn't impact their descendants, but your statement was this is primarily about the descendants. So,
I think it is primarily about the descendants.
Okay.
And two, like you said before, these men were pretty up there in age already, and they're not going to even, they're not going to see these things even happen. I mean, some of these things are going to happen many, many, many years in the future. So the point I'm making is that if these things are spoken to their descendants more than they are to them, of course, we both agree that Simeon and Levi were the ones that that did the slaughtering. They were the ones that were angry, but their descendants would suffer for it. And it could be that by saying this in advance, by declaring this prophecy, it was like God was saying to these nations, and I'm speculating here, or these groups, this is the reason why this misfortune has befallen you. But for the individuals that are a part of these groups, the individuals can repent and perhaps not suffer some of these things. I think that whenever God speaks of a nation, let's say he's speaking about judging a nation, God can speak about judging a nation, but yet certain individuals, any individual within the nation can still receive mercy if they repent. What's true for the nation is not always true for every individual in it. And so I think that, I'm kind of speaking out or thinking out loud here, but by saying this to these groups, God may be saying, even like to those from Simeon and Levi, this is the trajectory because of the actions of Simeon and Levi, but you don't have to necessarily suffer the effects of this. You can repent and perhaps. And there's a perfect example of this, but it's
do it.
We can't go. No, I'm not going to. It's because this one example actually would kind of prove what I'm saying. Well, but you know what though, I'm not going to go over it right now.
Just remember it and bring it up later.
I will. That's exactly.
You say this is that thing I was saying.
Yeah, I'm going to fall here exactly. I think exactly where I fell when we were having this disagreement about Jacob and Esau. I'm going to say that these are spoken to and about the individuals that are standing here receiving the blessing with import and prophetic meaning and consequences for all those to come. So I do not believe it's primarily about some unnamed group of people in the future, even though we will see fulfillment in individuals from that group. He is blessing his sons, not blessing his sons' descendants.
But you would agree, though, that these things are prophetic, right? Actually, you said earlier that these are more prophecy.
I just said that last time I spoke. Yes, I believe there is some prophetic import, but this is not a blessing with the eye primarily on some nebulous group of descendants. This is to the people he's speaking to. Because if you remove it from that, then why would he have anything to say about Reuben? Because all of Reuben's descendants don't go up and sleep with his concubine. All of Simeon's and Levi's offspring don't have this cruel anger. Not every one of Judah's descendants is a lion's whelp, and who has gone up. He couches. This. Does this have consequence and prophetic import for their descendants? Yes, of course it does. This is to the people he's looking in the eye as he's making those statements.
Well, that's true. That's true that he's talking to only his sons and there's no one else there. There's no one else around, as far as we know. But I think what he's doing is he's saying, because of your actions, because of the way you lived, your descendants are going to be impacted this way. And he mentions the result. For example, Simeon and Levi would be scattered in Israel. Well, there was no Israel at that time to be scattered in for Simeon and Levi. This had to do with their descendants. So and you say that in other passages too.
Well, I suppose that could be true. It could be true that because of something that we're not told that Issachar did, that his descendants are going to be slaves. Maybe. I don't know that we have the data to make that case. So,
Well, you both did, I think, express, even if the primary focus of who this is talking to, you guys seem to disagree about that, and I don't know that will be resolved in this conversation. But I think, unless I misunderstood, you both do agree that this does have some impact on the generations that would come and on the people that would come. And so, what do you think about that? Does it seem fair to you, or is there some explanation of that about why it would be that this blessing would be to them and then have impact and effect for the generations to come? Is that fair that the generations to come would be impacted by Reuben's choice, for example, Simeon and Levi's choice, for example?
Since we're talking about Simeon and Levi, I think, and this is just kind of similar to what I said earlier, I think a case can be made that the verses are presupposing that the descendants of Simeon and Levi would follow in the footsteps of their forefathers. In other words, it's not necessarily describing the future of all their descendants, but only those who continue in sin. And we have good reason to believe that God, that those who follow God would be blessed. What's spoken about a group is not necessarily true for every individual. So it's possible to speak of a tribe or a nation being cursed without saying that every individual within the group is cursed. Lot was a citizen of Sodom, a city under the judgment of God, and yet he and his family escaped judgment because he didn't live the way they did. Also, there's a reason to believe that a whole tribe could change its destiny by repenting and following God, and some statements about the future, at least in my opinion, are conditional and therefore don't have to happen. I'm not saying that the things that Jacob says here are all conditional, but I think if we go further in the Bible, and again, I'm not going to bring up any details right now, but I think we'll see that in some cases, when God makes statements about the future, those statements are not always unconditional and guaranteed to happen, but it's more of like a possibility. If you continue on the path you're on, this is the way you're going to end up. If you repent and if you follow me, God says, then your future could turn out differently. It just depends on what you decide to do.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with the reality that being faithful towards God has necessary benefits, and faithlessness towards God has its necessary benefits. I'm not sure that that's what's being said here. Verse 19, as for Gad, raiders shall raid him, but he will raid at their heels. Verse 20, as for Asher, his food will be rich, and he will yield royal dainties. I'm just not convinced that this is if you obey me, you'll be blessed, and if you disobey me, you'll be cursed. And so I don't want to read in what I'm not convinced that it's saying. So,
well, I want to be clear too. I am certainly not saying that's the case with all of these people, with all these groups. There is one example that I think maybe it sounds, based on what happens later on, it sounds like it at least a part of it may very well have been conditional. But again, we're not going to go there right now.
But as going back to your question, Joe, is this fair? I don't know how. I don't like questions like, "Is this fair?" Like what?
Eric wrote
what
the question
standard?
for everybody. By the way,
My mistake.
No wonder. It's not fair that I have to put up with these questions. Now, what we have seen in the Bible, and this goes back to Eric's point, and where I agree, the choices that we make and the choices that our fathers and mothers and his fathers make have consequences on our lives. Yes, of course. Is that fair? I don't know that that's a good question to ask. It is. It's a reality, whether you like it or not. Is it fair? I don't. Yeah, I struggle with. Is that a good question to ask? If my father, he's not, but if he had been an alcoholic and a serial adulterer, and that had negative impact on my life, is it fair? Maybe not, but it's for me. It just is. It's just a consequence of of decisions made that I can either choose to embrace. To Eric's point, I can either choose to embrace that, and I can be a serial adulterer and an alcoholic or whatever the case may be, and I can continue that, or I can turn away from those things. So, is it fair that the Issachar, was Issachar, right? Yeah, Issachar is going to become a slave at forced labor. I don't know. That seems to be what's being prophetically declared here. But is it fair? I don't know.
Well, I'm glad your dad wasn't that.
I'm glad too. Amen. Praise God. He's a great man.
No, you should not do that. Greg. Don't
do that.
But let's go ahead and leave it there. I mean, we could go around and around, and I appreciate you guys sharing your perspective. But let's shift gears a little bit more. I want to ask a related question. This one wasn't on the show sheet, so I'm going to kind of spring it on you right now. But as we were reading through, there is kind of an interesting word that just popped out at me in Genesis 49:6 that says that this was because of their self-will. You guys have any thoughts about that? I mean, we've talked a lot about the will in previous discussions. I don't think this verse ever came up. People talk a lot about free will, and I've heard people say, free will is not in the Bible except for with offerings or something. But this idea of self-will, you guys have any thoughts about this description of them and maybe what implications that has about Jacob's understanding about human agency?
Well, like I said earlier, the things that would happen to their descendants were not things that God just arbitrarily thought up. Some of these things were the result of the behavior of Jacob's sons. Simeon and Levi is just two examples. Issachar, like Greg said, we don't know what he did. At least if you guys know, I certainly don't. But so I think God, it wasn't like he just thought, well, okay, I don't know why, but I kind of want to curse these, his descendants. I'm just kind of in that mood right now.
He was still mad he was thinking about Reuben. He was still mad.
Yeah. He's like, I can't get over that.
That dude went up to my couch. Can you believe this? I can't
his car. Come here for your blessing.
But I think, I think the reason why these, for lack of a better word, these curses were pronounced was not for no reason, but because of the behavior of these men. And Greg, I think one thing you said was really good earlier when you said, there's only one thing. I couldn't think of anything else.
I'm surprised you found one.
There was that one thing.
You got that one.
I'll take my one. Go home.
But when you said it's not really a matter if it's fair or not, but this is just what happens. Like if someone makes a bad choice and someone suffers for it, that's just what happens. And I think, if someone sets a bad example for their descendants and their descendants follow that example, that's kind of cause and effect. I'm not saying that it's just as simple as that, and I'm not saying things can't change that. But yeah, I think that's kind of, maybe it's just as simple as something like that.
Yeah, I just, and as I hear the word fair, right, like I'm thinking of my kids and I'm thinking of how other people I know parent their kids. And so this idea of fairness comes up a lot. And I'm like, let's define, what do you mean by fair? Can you define that? And so as I read that word, I don't know what you mean.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask it this way. Do you think it's fair for their descendants to be punished for something they did?
Do I think it's fair that their descendants have consequences? Again, that sounds like a question for God, not a question for Greg. Punished? Like, what do we mean by punished? Do I think it's a natural consequence? Do I think do I think God has ordered the world so that there are consequences for my decisions that impact my children? Yeah, I that seems to be the way God's ordered the world. Do I like it? Sometimes only when it works out in my benefit, but when it works out against me, I'm like, no, that's totally unfair. Can we throw out that rule, God?
Yeah, we'll take the blessings because of the decisions of previous generations, but not the curses.
Yeah, so the philosophical concept of fair, I'd want to spend some time working on.
Well, maybe it's just as simple as what you said, is like you have to make a distinction between punishment and natural consequences. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because some people might look at this and go, boy, God's not being fair by punishing the descendants in these different ways. But if you look at it like, well, there are, you drop a pebble in the pond, there are ripples that go pretty far.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just kind of what's going on here.
God's law has been, go ahead and give me the demerit. It's fine. God's law has been established so that children are not held accountable for the sins of their fathers, and fathers are not held liable for the sins of their children. But does that mean there's no consequences? Those ripples don't rock the boat of those who, well, come on. Like, that seems to be the way God's made the world. And we're seeing that, for instance, here to some extent. And so, I just, fair isn't a helpful category in my mind.
I think that's a fair answer.
Well, I see what you did there. One demerit has been issued to Greg for running ahead. I will give Eric credit for not running ahead, even though he was trying to be goaded into himself getting a demerit earlier on. And I see that even though I tried to move on from the fairness issue and ask a question about being self-willed, you guys wanted to go right back to the fairness and
give them a
ignore
demerit
the
for that.
self-will question. So fair enough. I will take the hint, and you guys don't want to talk about that. So let's move on to the content of Genesis 49:10. This is a very interesting description in the blessing to Judah. Because of the fact that we are all biblically aware, we do know this will come up again. But instead of necessarily running ahead, what do you make about this prophecy about Judah's, well, just about Judah or Judah's descendants? I know maybe that's controversial, which it's to, but what do you make about Genesis 49:10?
The verse is describing what seems to be a royal line from Judah that will culminate with the coming of someone referred to as Shiloh. Now, I just caught this just recently. I knew what I thought this verse meant, and I haven't changed my mind on that. But it's interesting because here Shiloh is not a place, but a person, because the verse goes on to say, and to him. The him seems to be talking about Shiloh. So if we read in the Bible where we come across Shiloh and it's a place, actually here the Shiloh seems to be a person. So if you read the text that way, and I don't see any other way to read it, it makes it sound as if, let me just read it. It says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. Now, when he says this, the scepter won't depart, it means there's a continuation of this, of this scepter being passed on from one person to the next until Shiloh comes. And to him, that is to Shiloh, this person shall be the obedience of the peoples. And when this person comes, it says the nations of the earth, the peoples, will submit to him. So I think that it's pretty clear to me that this is talking about the succession of rulers that will culminate in this one final important ruler, Shiloh he's called here, and he will rule over the nations.
What do you, you're reading from the NASB, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you make of the notes that our editors have provided us for alternative readings? I assume your NASB has it. I see two different alternatives, or quote, until he comes to Shiloh, or quote, until he comes to whom it belongs.
Well, in both cases, there's a he that's in view here. And it seems like the point that's being made, and I think you can make this case no matter what version or what alternative translation you use, is there's going to be this line of rulers that will culminate in this one particular person coming. And when he comes, he'll rule over the nations. So I don't really think it changes the meaning. I mean, I guess you could say, well, if Shiloh is not a person, and if it is a place, if the alternative translation makes it sound like it might be a place, if he's coming to Shiloh, he's coming to a place.
One of the alternatives. The other one, until he comes to whom it belongs. That translates Shiloh rather than leaving it as a name or a place. It translates it to whom it belongs.
Okay. Well, either way, there will be this person who comes, and he'll rule over the nations. I don't really think
where are you seeing ruling over the, just out of curiosity, you've repeated that a number of times. Where do you see ruling over the nations here?
What says, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. If you compare this language with other verses, peoples oftentimes refers to nations, people groups. Peoples is plural, not singular. So peoples usually refers to different groups or different nations of people.
Yeah, the NET and the NIV, at least both, do translate it. NLT as well, about nations.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
So, yeah, the obedience of the peoples, plural, is a significant thing. For anybody who's interested, we've hit on a number of passages from Genesis that have prophetic import, especially for the coming Messiah. If you've ever sang a song about the Lion of the tribe of Judah, it seems like it's talking about this particular one. And so this particular verse here in 49:10, and we've got a free spreadsheet that you could download from our website that has many other prophecies, so that's available to any of our viewers who are interested in that. Let's move on for the sake of time. I have two other off-sheet questions that I want to ask you guys about just in the content of these blessings. This one sounds very significant, and Eric, I appreciate your perspective. What if we jump down to this blessing to Joseph in verse 24? There's this, at least in the NASB, a parenthetical note there at the end of this, so 24b. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel.
Yeah.
What do you guys make of that prophecy? And any thoughts that you have, I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I read that, and like, as I read that, I went, oh, I need to, because it wasn't a question on the sheet, I didn't focus on it, but it's something I need to go back to, because I don't think of the shepherd, the stone, or maybe the rock of Israel, as being ascribed to Joseph's line so much as I do of Judah's line. But that seems like a significant statement.
Well, the way this is worded, it says, but his bow remained firm, and his arms were agile from the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. It almost sounds like this isn't so much saying the Messiah is going to come from this tribe, but it's almost like it's saying God will strengthen this.
From there is the shepherd. From where is they? And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm thinking through this deeply for the first time. From where is the there?
Well, earlier he says from the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. I don't know. I guess it could be interpreted more than one way. But the verse 25, from the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty One who blesses you. So it's, I guess, one way to interpret it is it could be saying not so much that the Messiah would come from Joseph, but that God would give some kind of special help. I don't know. I guess that's one alternative interpretation.
Yeah, I agree. So again, having not processed this, from if it had said, from that, the strength and from that comes from the shepherd, the stone of Israel, I'd go, oh, that makes total sense. I don't know.
If you compare other translations do seem to render it in the sense that Eric is talking about, that the earlier part, the strength of his might, will be from the shepherd, rather than saying that the shepherd will come from this tribe. But the way that the NASB reads, it does seem like this is a potential. If we look at 49:10 and then this verse, it's like, well, I guess which one are we expecting the Messiah to come from? Yeah. But perhaps the other translations are better, and it is not promising alternative pathways for the genealogy of the Messiah. As far as I know, this passage here in 24 is never quoted in the New Testament. So clearly the tribe of Judah is where the Messiah comes from. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. And it wasn't on the sheet, so I understand why you maybe didn't look into it as closely. But reading and comparing some other translations, Eric, what you were suggesting certainly comes out clearer in some other modern English translations, that the NASB putting it as a parenthetical makes it read, it just kind of stands out as you're reading it in the New American Standard, which is what we read. So I appreciate that. The last thought I have on this before we dive into chapter 50 is at the very end. We've talked about the Old Testament view of the afterlife. We talked about Jacob's desire to not be buried in Egypt, but to be buried, and he gives very specific instructions of where he wants to be buried. But then at the end of this, verse 33, it says he drew his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. That doesn't seem, he wasn't buried at this moment. And so he wanted to be buried with his people, but it says he was gathered with his people as soon as he breathed his last and died. Is that speaking of something about the place of his soul or something else, or is that reading too much into it? Is this just telling us that, oh yeah, by the way, he would go be buried, even though we haven't read of his burial yet? Any thoughts on this about him breathing his last and being gathered to his people?
I assume that the latter interpretation that you mentioned was what it meant. I thought it meant that he would eventually go to be buried with his family members. But it's interesting you bring that up, because the way that it's worded seems like it might be able to go either way.
Yeah, I guess I've always, and it might be just because of my extra biblical literary history, I viewed this as kind of an axiom for, yeah, he was dead. He went to his father's kind of old English Tolkien idea. It just is. That's where I draw.
I'm going to start giving demerits for Tolkien references, I think.
I'm going to start giving demerits for you being an excellent guy.
Wow. That was not where that sentence took a turn on me. I thought it was going somewhere else. Let's get into Genesis chapter 50. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for it, for such is the period required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. When the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am about to die. In my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father. Then I will return. Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the household of Joseph, and his brothers, and his father's household. They left only their little ones and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen. There also went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and sorrowful lamentation, and he observed 7 days mourning for his father. Now when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore it was named Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. Thus the sons did for him as he had charged them, for his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham had bought along with the field for a burial site from Ephraim the Hittite. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, What if Joseph bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him? So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, Your father charged before he died, saying, Thus you shall say to Joseph, Please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Now Joseph stayed in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons. Also the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. In chapter 50, we see even the Egyptians mourning for the passing of Jacob. What do you make of that? I mean, we saw so many details that the Egyptians viewed just the lifestyle and the profession of these visitors and sojourners as loathsome, and then they have a grievous mourning over his passing. What do you make of that detail?
They probably wept so long because Jacob was the father of Joseph, the man who saved the world from famine, or the one that God used to save the world. So the respect they had for Joseph probably carried over to his father. And also, I think Jacob, in many ways, was a great man. He had great wealth. He had a large family. And he was very old. As a matter of fact, when he went before Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And it's like he could tell, man, this guy's up there. And it almost seems like he was shocked that, that Jacob was that old, even though Jacob said, my years are few. It's like, what do you mean? But, compared to Isaac and Abraham, at that time, his years were few relative to theirs. But still, he was still a very old man. So I think all these reasons probably are why there was so much weeping.
Yeah, I'm not an expert by any means on ancient Egyptian, customs, but it seems to me, it's my assumption that this wouldn't have been something extravagant that they did, uniquely for him. Perhaps grieving, showing a time of mourning for a great man, somebody obviously respected by Pharaoh. He had blessed Pharaoh, and so Pharaoh gave him honor to some extent. And so, this just seems like the dignified passing of an important person to me.
He must have blessed Pharaoh differently than he blessed Reuben.
I would guess so. Sure, yeah. You're going to be a slave.
So Joseph, he also seems to refer back to this prophecy from Genesis 15. Jacob had reminded him of it. Now Joseph, as his death is approaching, he reminds his brothers of it. You guys have any thoughts about this constant reminding each other of God's faithfulness to do what he promised, especially considering that the promise was really many years in the future?
When Joseph says you, because he tells his brothers, or he's speaking to those who are near him, as he's, on his deathbed. He says, when he says you, he probably used it the way Jacob used it in Genesis 49:8. If you look at, if you go there, Genesis 49:8, it says, Judah, your brothers shall praise you, your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Am I reading the right verse? 49:8. Yeah. Yeah. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you. Now, Jacob was not. It seems like he wasn't saying this to Judah specifically. I mean, yes, it was spoken to Judah, but I think there was more of an application for the descendants of Judah. And so when Joseph says, God's going to bring you out of the land, he doesn't mean you standing around me right now are going to be brought out of the land here pretty soon. He had to have known, since God was actually very specific about the timing of the prophecy in Genesis 15. He said 400 years. 400 years had not gone by yet, not even close. So I'm assuming that the word you is more of a, your descendants kind of a thing. So that's the way that I understand it. I think that avoids what some might consider a contradiction.
It's funny, as I've always read this, it says Joseph said to his brothers, but at the same time, Joseph's 110 years old now. I wonder how many of the brothers are there. So in my mind, brothers is more descendants or extended family than it is the individuals, Simeon and Reuben and Levi, unless they lived considerably older, longer, perhaps, or as long as Jacob. But yeah, I forget the original question now, so I'm going to just keep rambling unless you stop me. So
I guess let's go ahead and stop you. As we conclude the book of Genesis, we finish off with the death of Joseph. We've been tracing Joseph's life for many chapters. We've talked about it for many episodes. You guys got any kind of concluding remarks about the life of Joseph, or anything that we can really learn from this story being recorded in Scripture, applicationally speaking? I guess any concluding remarks you've got we'll be interested in before we conclude this episode.
This is just another example of God's faithfulness. God made certain promises in the past, and we see him working throughout this story to bring those promises to fulfillment. God's methods are not always the ones we would prefer. I'm sure Joseph didn't prefer being sold into slavery, but God used those circumstances to make him ruler of Egypt, so he could save the world from the famine. And not only that, but because of Joseph's position, he was able to move his family into the land of Goshen, which was also part of God's plan. So I like how like how Jacob described God as his shepherd, and that seems like the perfect word to use. This story has been about God shepherding his people and proving to them that he can be trusted throughout the entire thing. So I just think that's what a great ending to the book.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I could put it more eloquently than that. I would just say the covenantal faithfulness of God. God has promised something, and something much smaller in the grand scheme of things. And he's being faithful in that, and God, the faithful of God, are expecting God to be faithful, and so this ought to build great confidence for the greater covenantal promises that he's made.
Well, gentlemen, as always, I appreciate your perspective on these things. That will conclude our discussion for today. If you're still watching the video and you like the video, make sure that you like the video. And we would love to hear your thoughts below. There is a lot more in this section of Scripture that we didn't discuss. And there's a lot more that could have been said that we just, for the sake of time, didn't say. So if you have comments, we'd love to read those. Go ahead and leave those down below. And until we see you again, get equipped, obey your King, and glorify your God.